we're moving on to the third cryptid, and I have to preface this with a story about St. George. So, Nate, do you want to tell us about St. George?
God no. I if I'm honest with you, I don't know a massive amount about Saint George. I know that we use his flag, which is which makes me look like a terrible English person. But it's not something you get taught in U.S. schools.
Right. So, what is the main thing you know about St. George?
That he's a
Apart
saint.
from and maybe the story with the dragon?
No, I don't even know. Don't even know that. I'm
No.
afraid. No.
Yeah. Me growing up in America, I have heard the name, but that's it. I couldn't tell you
Yeah.
anything about it.
Oh dear. Okay, St. George is the patron saint of England, and this is why you have his flag.
That's right. That's right. He is definitely the flag that we call the St. George. That's 100%.
Right. So
I
I
know
saw.
the state we're in, Georgia, was named after him.
There you
No,
go.
that's a king after King George.
Close
Okay.
enough.
Close enough.
Close
They're both
enough.
Georges.
It was one of the English politicians. They named Georgia after it.
So
The
this
king.
Georgia wasn't named after St. George either, but it's much closer to where he originally lived. This is the country of Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains, south of Russia. And they don't call themselves Georgia. That is just the Western name. But they're very interested in St. George, and he's one of their patron saints. St. George came from Cappadocia, and that was a part of Greece back then. Now it's a part of Turkey, but the Turks weren't in Greece back at that time. So he is a saint who lived in the late 3rd century. He died in 303. He's a military saint, he's a martyr, and the one story you should know about him is that he fought a dragon, and he's a dragon slayer.
Ooh.
This is why Christians and Muslims venerate him. So there are even stories among Muslims about St. George, although he's a Christian saint. They like him because even in Islam, he's a martyr. He's the patron saint of England, Georgia, Ethiopia, Malta, Portugal, the city of Moscow, and various other places. So he's really, really popular. And he's one of the saints of the Russian army, for example.
Wow.
And I've mentioned him because of the dragon slaying, because we'll come to that. There is an Orcadian folktale, and Orcadian refers to the Orkney Islands. So, Nate, what do you know about the Orkney Islands?
Gosh, she really just puts me on the spot here. Not really anything.
I know.
If I'm 100%. Luther does.
Oh, tell us.
He just told me. We were just discovering that the word orca meant monster because we were talking about the orcas, the killer whales in the Mediterranean, and hence the name Orca or Corsaeus, I think was the Latin name of it. And said Orkney and all that was supposed to be the land of the monsters, I believe is what I was told. But I've got mashed potatoes for brain, so I'm not sure that's correct or not. But
Yes, we talked about that. You remember that? Great. So yes, orca, and the full name of the orca whale is Orcinus orca. So Orcinus comes from the Latin word orcus, and orcus is the netherworld. It's the realm of Hades, but it's only in Greek that it's the realm of Hades. The Romans called it orcus.
Right.
And orc is a Viking word, and Tolkien took his word orc from this word, and the French name ogre is also related to it. So ogres and orcs, they're monsters, but the Vikings mostly use this word for giant sea monsters, for whales, for example. And this is why the orca is called orca. So it's a combination of a Latin word that basically is orca and a Viking word that is also orca. They mean different things, but you could translate them as, well, in combination, you could translate them as death whale or netherworld beast, which is really cool as a scientific name.
Yeah. Wow.
So the Orkney Islands are islands that belong to Scotland, and then north of Scotland there is another small group of islands that is called the Shetland Islands, and Shetland means sheepland islands. That is also a Viking thing. And then you have the Faroe Islands, and they don't belong to Britain. They're, I think they belong to Denmark. And Faroe also means sheep islands, but a little bit different. So a bunch of small islands. And I have to say that I heard this story about St. George, but the original tale is from the Orkney Islands. So in the Orkney Islands, the hero, the dragon slayer, is called a Sipatl, and that translates to Cinderlad. Let me show you the Cinderlad. So I've already sent this to Nate.
Oh yeah.
Scottish Cinderella. Well, they called him that because he was actually very lazy. He was a boy in a big family, and he wasn't like Cinderella at all. You know, she cleaned all day, but he didn't. He liked to sleep in the ashes, and he liked to be dirty. He was a dirty, lazy person, and nobody expected much of him. But there was a situation where a really big beast came across the sea, and it was a dragon, but a snake-like dragon, so more like a sea serpent. That is called the stoorworm. So let me get a picture of that. So it's really, really big. It's not a whale. It really looks like a serpent. And the stoorworm was threatening to attack Orkney. So they had a wizard on the Orkney Islands back then, and the wizard told them, well, to drive away the beast, you will have to sacrifice some virgins to the beast.
Classic.
Works every time.
It sure does.
Because of course, I mean,
When in doubt, sacrifice virgins.
right. I don't know if you've seen that, but during COVID, there was actually a meme going around, and it was a meme showing a volcano, and they said, well, has anyone tried throwing politicians in a volcano yet? That might solve it.
Or it might make it worse since they aren't virgins.
That's right.
I don't care.
And you know,
They got my vote.
We still try
and, you know,
it.
your gift to the gods should probably not be something that is worthless, but something that you hold in high regard. So that is why you typically don't sacrifice people who are evil. You sacrifice pure virgins because you want to do something good for the gods.
That's right.
So yeah.
Don't send them tainted meat.
It just may be my man brain coming, but it's to me it'd be like if you had an old raw bone and you're throwing it to the dog and say, "Here's your new toy, tear it up."
Yes. So here you can see the virgins. It's the same series of pictures, I think. So among the virgins, there was a princess, and her name is Gem the Lovely. So that is her actual name. And Acipitl thought that the girls should not be sacrificed. So he stole a magical sword and a magical horse, and he fought the beast. So the person that nobody had big expectations for, that's the guy who actually slew the dragon. And he did this in a way that is very similar to a Greek story. So he held a spear with a lump of lead into the dragon's mouth, and through the fire, it melted and it clogged up its throat. So the thing actually suffocated to death. And during the fight, it lost several parts thanks to the magical sword. And these parts became the actual islands that we have now, because I'm not sure whether there was only one Orkney Island back then, or whether a Occipital fought from the British mainland. But the teeth that fell out of the dragon's snout when he hit him really hard, they fell into the sea and they became the Orkney, Shetland, and Faroe Islands. And when Occipital cut out the tongue, that fell into the sea and became the Baltic Sea. And the dragon finally died and curled up in the sea, and that became Iceland. And Iceland has these volcanoes and has these hot springs because, the liver of the dragon is still burning down inside its belly. So that's an explanation for why Iceland is this land of fire and snow.
Ah.
And I've heard this story about St. George. So I think I've read a poem somewhere about it, and it was about Saint George fighting the dragon and killing the dragon, and exactly the same happened with the islands and the tongue and Iceland and so on. And they used this story to explain how the British Isles were created, because while St. George was fighting the dragon thrashed around with its tail and created the Irish Sea and the coastline of England and Ireland.
Huh.
So
Okay.
that explains why you have such a rugged coastline and why it's not all just a nice flat beach, but a lot of it is pretty tall. It's because a dragon created it with its tail.
I mean, to be fair, that is a pretty cool origin story. Yeah.
That is great. So I'll show you young Occipital here. He doesn't
See,
look very.
back in those days, they didn't have Netflix and everything. So when it got dark, you had the grandpa sitting around the fire telling the little kids these stories to scare the kids. And of course, that got passed by word of mouth and over time became reality to them.
Yes, and
That's right.
it's a non-scientific explanation. And a lot of cultures have these. So a lot of cultures use religion, for example, or fairy tales to explain how things started. For example, there is a tale from Vietnam about how the tiger got its stripes. And it's pretty brutal. So they have a background story for that, for example. There are some more pictures. So some of them are really old, like this stone, for example. That's a carving that dates back to Viking times. And here we are at an overlap with other mythologies, because this fight against the giant sea serpent, that reminds of the fight between Thor and the Midgard serpent.
Jormungandr, isn't it?
You need to do a show sometime on how her brain can hold so much knowledge.
Yeah.
So
But this,
how many gigabytes of RAM does she have up there?
now you're getting all technical. So Norse mythology makes sense in this context because, there were Vikings around. But there is also some Greek mythology. So have you ever heard of Bellerophon?
Don't think
No.
so.
No. But you've heard of Pegasus.
Yes.
Okay, Pegasus is Bellerophon's horse. That is a guy who also has a magical horse. And I'll show you pictures in the story of Bellerophon. He fought the Chimera. So there was a problem that he had to solve, and that was the chimera, which is an animal that consists of 3 different animals and usually doesn't have 3 heads. It usually only has a lion's head, and then it has the body of a goat, and its tail is like a snake tail. So not necessarily 3 heads, and you can see some depictions of that here. You can even see the spear with a lump of lead that he rams into the chimera's throat, and the fire inside the chimera melts that lead and suffocates it. That is how he fights it. And he also got a magical horse, the Pegasus, and the Pegasus was created by the gods from the blood of Medusa.
Oh.
So it was a very pure and wonderful thing that came from something horrible. And as a horse with wings, it was very well suited to fight the chimera because you couldn't just run around it. You had to dive away. And of course, when you have a horse with wings, that works much better than just having an average horse.
Quite right.
And nobody knows what the chimera actually was. So even I don't have an explanation for this because you can't just say it's probably a prehistoric animal.
No, I mean it's just born out of mythology, isn't it?
Well, I might have an answer for that.
Oh, what is it?
Ooh, a theory.
Tell us.
One time they said that when they were doing excavations, that the ancient peoples, I forgot what country they were in, they would bury multiple different types of animals as a ritual to their god in the same grave. And later, when they were dug up, they found the bones of this animal and that animal and thought they all belonged to the same animal.
Huh.
And said that, like, these shamans were pictured as having wings. Well, in real life, they used the wings of the condor and they just dried the wings and put them on their cape and wore them around the town like the Cherokee Indians or whatever had eagle feathers in their hair. But
Well,
when
then
they
this.
buried the shaman with the wings and then later were rediscovered, that's where the mythology of winged people or angels came from. But it was just multiple animals buried in the same spot, and they tried to put all the bones together, and they didn't have the modern technology that we do today, and they just assumed all these animals were all one and the same, and there were multiple animals put in one pit.
Mhm.
That is the case with the griffin, and we will talk about the griffin, but
Okay.
not today.
Okay.
I have one more mythology. That is the Minoan mythology, and that is an island south of the Greek mainland. So the Minoans were known for being a little bit crazy. As you can see, they did gymnastics on fully grown bulls.
Whoa.
That is actually the most well-known picture associated with Minoans. And the other one, the palace, is the Palace of Knossos, and that is their capital city. So this is a very old island civilization. It's older than many other civilizations, even in Greece. They were quite advanced. And if you've heard about the story of Icarus, then that is also tied to the Minoans because they had a king, Minos, and he needed an architect, and he brought one in from the Greek mainland. So, what did he need an architect for? We will do a video that contains the full story of the Minotaur, but at the moment I'll just show you the labyrinth because there is a connection to the story of Occipital. So Daedalus, who is Icarus's father, was an architect from mainland Greece, and the Minoans brought him over to construct this labyrinth to contain the Minotaur. And at one point we will talk about why the Minotaur had to be contained and what it actually was. But this story continues by the Minoans asking for tributes from Greek city-states. And these tributes were people. Let me see. Yeah. So there is a painting, a 19th century painting, of the hero Theseus and the youths from Athens. So Athens, for example, sent 14 young people to Crete, where the Minoans lived, every year, 7 girls and 7 boys, and they were led into the labyrinth of the Minotaur, and then they usually vanished, and they didn't show up again. And I think we'll keep the rest for the story about the Minotaur. But this has been interpreted as a human sacrifice of sorts, and Theseus is the guy who went to Crete and tried to end this. So this human sacrifice to a monster is very similar to the human sacrifice that the people on the Orkney Islands tried to give to the sea serpent, and this is why I mention it. And you have Norse mythology here with the Midgard serpent and Thor. You have Greek mythology here, like the mythology about the Chimera and also about the Minotaur. And this all comes together in this tale. So it can't actually be that old because they must have had access to Greek mythology. Why am I saying this? Why am I talking about British coastlines and sea serpents and stuff? So why is that important? Because we have another saint here. We have a saint who's an eyewitness to something very strange, not to say weird, and it happened in the British Isles. And it's not someone slaying a dragon; it's someone taming a dragon. And I wanted to get the story of St. George and Occipital out of the way because it is in some way connected. So you have a sea serpent, and the animal we're talking about has been compared to a sea serpent. And of course, this would be Nessie, the monster of Loch Ness. So, what's wrong with you?
I just like doing drama and intrigue. Don't mind me.
Okay. Good. Yes. The most well-known picture is, of course, this one from 1934. It's called the Surgeon's Picture, and it has been debunked. This is not Nessie. This is a puppet sitting on a toy boat, and they photographed it in a way that you have no reference on the outside how tall this thing could actually be. It's tiny.
Sure is.
So they faked a monster sighting, but it looks pretty serpent-like. And of course, they said it's a plesiosaur. This is Nessie. And well, not actual Nessie. I have to to tell you
Damn
this
it.
is not the actual thing. Yeah, but this is an animatronic sitting in the lake, and you can take pictures with it. So in front of it there is a fence, and you can stand by the fence and then look all surprised, and the thing is moving behind you. You can take videos with that thing.
Yeah.
But for a moment I have to stop sending pictures because now it's Nate's turn, and I think he also has a horrifying picture from Loch Ness.
Yeah, that's kind of a mean way to put it, Ligeia, but thank you for that. Yeah, so as you can imagine, being English, we obviously get to go to places, and one place, because of the whole history of Nessie and everything, meant that we had to have a family trip one time there. So I actually have a picture from 1996 when we're out on Loch Ness, little family outing. Can you guess which one of these children is me?
In 1996, you would have been about 4 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I would say you're the one on the right.
Really? You think I'm the one on the right?
You're not the very little one in the middle.
No,
Or are you
I'm
the
not the
one who's screwing up his little face and screaming? Like he just
the little dramatic one. That's me. I'm so shocked you didn't get it immediately.
No. Great. And is this Urquhart Castle?
That's
in the
right.
background?
That's right.
Yeah. Very famous location. So you were on a boat. You were actually on the lake.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, I don't remember all the details, but I'll get my dad to tell me the details about it.
That is very irresponsible of your dad.
It was probably some kind of little boat tour to go find Nessie. You know how it is. Anything to make money, right?
Yeah, just take the kids with you.
Yeah.
You have 3. If the monster eats 1, you'll still have 2.
Yeah, it's a child tribute, right?
I heard an
Exactly.
old saying one time that monsters make money.
That's right.
Right.
And
So
it
do
doesn't matter
aliens.
whether it's a place on Earth or a movie. I mean, look at all the movies that deal with monsters and they're blockbuster movies.
Damn right. It's
That
so true.
everybody loves a monster.
This could have gone so wrong.
But it didn't.
Okay. No, you survived. And we're all happy that you survived.
Oh, thank
Okay.
you.
Now,
Um,
since I have never been over there, did you see, or you said you don't remember, did anybody see anything weird, just like wakes on the water, or was it just a lake?
I mean, to my recollection, it's just a lake.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll
Sadly,
go into
nothing
this.
super exciting. They got a fair level of touristy kind of things, like a gift shop, and I don't think they had the animatronic back then, but they did have some kind of they did have a kind of a Nessie statue thing, I remember, but it was on land by the gift shop and everything. So nothing in the water really that was exciting.
Yeah. Well, I sent Ligeia a picture of some seals. Did you send that to him?
No, but I have it here, so I'll go into that now.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, but I want to start with the plesiosaur.
Okay.
Um, so this is the most common thing that they say could be Nessie, and as you have seen, the animatronic looks like a plesiosaur.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually not very likely because it's a reptile, and it's a marine reptile. So there are two reasons why this is probably not Nessie. I mean, three if you take into consideration that it has been dead for a very long time.
It's a pretty good
So
one.
you would typically look at animals that lived somewhat close to our lifetime. This is a bit too far away. This lived in the age of dinosaurs, so we're talking 65 million plus years, at least. And one of the other reasons is, as a marine reptile, it would probably have had trouble to exist in a freshwater lake because you can't just switch from one to the other. There are some animals that can do that, like bull sharks and saltwater crocodiles, for example, but it's not very common. So fish don't typically swim from saltwater to freshwater or vice versa.
And the
Um,
temperature.
Yes, temperature is 0.3, that it's too cold for a reptile. So we know about some reptiles from the dinosaur age that they were most likely warm-blooded, and that would have made it possible for them to exist in colder climates. But we're not sure about the plesiosaur. So the cold may have been an argument against this. But there are some other theories about animals that still exist. And just to show you the big catfish, let's start with an ordinary catfish. So that is a normal Wells catfish that is very common in Europe. And you can see why they're called catfish, because they have these whiskers.
That's right.
This one would probably not have been mistaken for Nessie. But the ones that live in the Chernobyl cooling pond are a bit bigger.
Yeah, I'd say a bit bigger.
Slightly. And as Luther already said, this is not radiation. These are Danube River catfish, and the Danube is a very long, broad river in Central Europe that goes from Western Germany to the Black Sea, and in Romania you have the delta of the Danube. So very long river, and the catfish in the river aren't that big. But when they get into smaller ponds, and it doesn't matter whether this is a radioactive pond or not, it's just the size of the pond, they grow to this size. They're basically as long as a human.
It feeds you for a while.
Yeah. So that
And I've
might
heard that they're extremely intelligent because I've seen some YouTube videos where they will actually take a piece of rotten meat and push it up on the bank and wait for the birds or the vultures to come down and start feeding on it, and then they'll grab the birds and eat them.
Wow.
So they know how to bait birds in to grab them.
Yes, and they eat dogs and everything. So yeah, they're sort of a garbage disposal. They eat everything.
Yeah.
The next thing that I have here is an eel, and there is some evidence that there are big eels in Loch Ness because people have analyzed the water and they have found eel DNA in the water, which shouldn't be surprising. But this is how they got the idea that there is an eel cryptid. Let me see. There might be a giant eel. Oh, this picture doesn't. Sorry, it's broken. Can't show you.
How dare you?
But well, they think that maybe the eel is quite serpent-like, so this could be a giant eel in Loch Ness. Or even worse, it could be manatees.
Huh.
Mischievous manatees.
That's an interesting one. I never heard
Well,
manatees as a theory.
that one isn't realistic because they're also saltwater animals. I mean, they can swim in canals, so they can probably switch from saltwater to freshwater. But they simply don't live around the British Isles. You would have to bring them over from the Americas. So yeah, and then it would be too cold for them.
Right.
Another good one is the seal. So, like the plesiosaur, seals have these fins that they can move on, which means they're not very fast on land, but they're fast in the water. And as you can see here, they swim in formation sometimes. So, if there is a seal up front, you can see the head, and of the other seals, you would probably just see the bodies, and that would look like a serpent in the water.
Right.
That's one theory, and that is likely because seals can live in cold water. We even have a seal cryptid here, and this picture works. So this is a serpent seal. This doesn't actually exist, but some people have theorized that there may be a serpent seal in Loch Ness. Another one is an animal that looks very prehistoric and is also very big. That is a sturgeon. It's a giant fish, and it kind of has this crocodile pattern on its back. So you could mistake it for a reptile, but it doesn't look like a serpent.
No, it's just a massive fish.
Yeah. Also, an animal that can survive in fresh water and in cold fresh water. So also a bit more likely than other theories. A crazy theory is that it could have been a whale, and that the neck that people saw wasn't actually a neck. It may have been a whale penis.
Oh.
And this is an actual whale penis that was sighted in the waters around South Africa. And they thought it was a cryptid, so they didn't realize this was part of a whale. So they gave it a name and they called it Trunco.
Oh no.
Okay. There is, by the way, for those who may be interested, a penis museum in Iceland, and they have whale penises. So if you ever question what that actually looks like, I have pictures of them. I can send you to them privately. No, sorry, I can send them to you privately. Sorry, I'm losing it. Yes, there is a penis museum in Reykjavik, and they have one of a blue whale, which is 3.5 meters long.
Holy shit.
So, but yes, it's probably not a whale. Let's be honest. How would it get into Loch Ness?
Yeah. And even if it was a whale, then that means that there is an endangered animal, because if there's so few of them and they are in that lake, that would be a unique species having such a rare freshwater whale.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the whales that swim in Loch Ness would probably not be that well endowed, I would say, because they would have to be smaller whales. I can show you a picture here of that part of Scotland. So here's what I meant by it was created by a thrashing dragon tail. You can see the coastline, and it's kind of all rugged and destroyed. And the Loch Ness lake is in a trench that goes through all of Scotland. As you can see, there might be a connection to the sea. This has not been confirmed. So there might be some exchange between the lake and seawater. But if there is such a thing, it's probably just like a small pipe-like opening, so it's not big enough for a whale to swim through.
Mm.
Technically, it looks like Scotland almost broke apart into two pieces, which is, of course, a result of the dragon slaying going on there. Okay, then let's get to the last one. And the last one looks like somebody actually found Nessie.
Oh.
Do you have any
Ooh.
idea what that could be?
It's weird because I don't want to immediately say that it's some kind of a creature. I'm getting the feeling that it's definitely more man-made. But
Oh no, this is an animal. These are the remains of an animal.
oh.
It's real.
Because it's got the kind of flippers.
It's
And
a
I
shark.
haven't figured out how to work the pictures on this yet, so I can't see it until probably I hang up, so I can't put my input on it.
You can click the picture.
Oh, it could be upside down. Oh, hang on. I see.
Okay, so yes, it's a shark.
Right. And
It's
they found that
a
in
giant.
Loch Ness?
No, that is the
Oh.
thing. They found it in the Pacific Ocean, and it's a Japanese fishing boat, an industrial Japanese fishing boat in the 1970s. But they pulled this one up. So they were fishing for something else, and they accidentally pulled this one up. And they thought it must be something like a plesiosaur. And they took pictures of it, but it stank so badly that they threw it back into the water, and they didn't take samples, as far as I know. So the explanation for this one is that what you see as the head is not the entire head. It doesn't have a long neck. It's just that when a shark decomposes, then the gills are the first part that decomposes. So that rots away, and that leaves the spine and part of the head.
Oh.
So this is not actually a long-necked creature.
Oh god, that's it's a creepy,
It's
weird thought.
very big, so it's probably the remains of a Pacific sleeper shark. And Pacific sleeper sharks have been confused with megalodon sightings. So that's how big they get.
Wow.
But they're actually not they're not related to the megalodon, and they're not as dangerous as the megalodon.
Right.
Okay. So these are the theories, and before we go into the eyewitness accounts, maybe you would like to tell us which theories you prefer.
Well, I mean, I know over the years the plesiosaur one kept getting debunked constantly, and I mean, yeah, as you've even said, it makes less and less sense. You know, there's some kind of a reptile that didn't really exist. There's just no way. There's no way you're talking about something millions upon millions of years ago existing nowadays in that kind of a small capacity. It just is random. Maybe in the ocean I can understand, but not in like a little tiny lake. It doesn't really make sense. I think eel, like just potential eel sightings, that kind of feels a bit more fitting because yet again, it's just a lot of misconstrued things. When it comes to the biggest eyewitness accounts usually talk about how there's always some kind of a long neck kind of a thing, which yet again makes me think of an eel compared to seeing a long neck and a body. You don't always get that kind of a description. Manatees, I thought that was quite an interesting one. That's one I'd never heard. But I did hear about seals, I did hear about sturgeons, catfish. I heard a couple of different theories, but obviously, yet again, nothing that was ever super definitive because, yet again, people keep arguing and debunking. And I think at the end of the day, it's quite clear that Nessie is just a case of mistaken identity mixed with hoaxes as well. So I personally don't think there is any kind of quote unquote unidentified sea monster. I don't think that's the case. But I'm always interested to hear other people's ideas and theories, including if anybody wants to put stuff down in the comments below. Let us know your ideas, what you think. If Nessie is real, what could Nessie potentially be? Do you have any evidence? Do you have any proof? We're really curious.
I will tell you what it is. But I want to hear your opinion on the theories that we already have.
You're gonna tell me what it is?
I think I can tell you. Like
So
90%.
you're saying you're saying Nessie is real in your opinion, though?
It was real. It's not
Okay.
there anymore, but it used to be there, and it used to be there in historical times.
Okay.
But what do you think, Luther?
What I was going to say is, instead of looking for one answer, I think there may be multiple answers. See, every time somebody saw something strange on the water, they attributed it to Nessie. At times it could have been, because I've seen several videos of just wakes on top of the water, but there was nothing actually sticking out of the water. It was just a wake. So that could have either been a giant eel, a sturgeon. I don't think it's manatees because they're very temperature sensitive. I know the ones in Florida, when it gets wintertime here, they actually hover in those hot springs in Florida because they can't even take the cold water in the Gulf. So I just can't see them living in Scotland. I just don't see it. But now the giant eel thing is a possibility because if you ever saw the show River Monsters,
yep,
the guy went to New Zealand, and there's a type of eel that lives in New Zealand called the short-finned eel, and these things get gigantic. And he even put a deer carcass out in shallow water and a GoPro camera, and these big eels come up and they would grab onto the deer, do the crocodile roll, pulling chunks of meat out of this deer. But these things were enormous. So, eels do travel from saltwater to freshwater. They usually hatch in saltwater and live their adult life in freshwater. And so the eel's a possibility. The seal pods that you sent the picture of her with that, the front seal has his head up and the other seal's forming the humps. So I think it could be a combination of all these different sightings that are unexplained. They're all putting them together to explain one animal. And then two, you have to consider the temperature and the food supply. So a big giant animal, you would have to have a certain number of animals to prevent them from inbreeding to death.
Yeah,
And is there enough fish in that lake to supply a giant colony of these big animals?
Or maybe they don't eat fish.
So I know there's some fish in that lake, some salmon and everything, but is there really enough fish in there to keep monsters going? So, and then two, as many people that live around that lake, I think you would have more spottings than you actually do. Now, there may have been something prehistoric that doesn't live there anymore, like Ligeia said, that, it could have been just transient sharks or whatever that could travel from saltwater to freshwater. Because in the Caspian Sea, for example, they recently discovered there's a subspecies of the spiny dogfish, which is this type of shark, and they call it the Black Sea shark. And there's some guys on YouTube, they were cliff diving off into the water, and when they splashed down, this one guy come up screaming, "Shark, shark!" And they're like, "It can't be a shark down there. This is fresh water." And then when they went down there with a camera, sure enough, it was a shark. But they're harmless. They're just big.
Right.
But they're as afraid of you as you are of them. So something like that could have been in there in the lake at one time and probably got fished out or ran out or whatever. So, it could be a combination of things put together. And then, of course, Monster makes money so that they could keep that theory going to keep tourists coming because they bring money into the area.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Well, before
Shall we
you,
move on to?
sorry, before you give us the reveal, I'm gonna go pee. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. Then let's all go pee.
No, let's talk about Nate while he's gone.
Good. Are you ready?
All ready when you are.
Okay, there are two more points, and the first are eyewitness accounts, and then I will tell you what's going on here.
Okay.
So I'm starting the eyewitness accounts with a story about crocodiles in northern Russia. Oh, yeah, now it's processing. So you see that I have some pictures from bestiaries here, and we've talked about bestiaries in a previous video. This is how people imagine crocodiles to look like. And the older ones, where they're really green and dinosaur-like or fish-like, you can tell these are the medieval ones. And people didn't really know what to expect from a crocodile. So even throughout time, when we progress into early modern times and finally modern times, they still don't really look like crocodiles. So that's why I'm saying that eyewitness accounts can be distorted. Maybe that they don't know what they're seeing. And there is a good example of that from the late 16th century from the city of Pskov. And I'll write it down for you because it's written with a PS at the beginning.
Oh
Pskov.
God. Yeah, I would have had no idea.
Yes, and I'll show you the city. So this is Pskov in summer and in winter. It's a very old Russian town. It has two main rivers. That is the Pskov River and the Old River, and the Old River is the bigger one. And the crocodiles were sighted in the Old River. So as you can see, it's close to the water, but it's also a very snowy place in winter. And it is far up north. What I'm showing you here is a world map with the 57th parallel north that goes through Pskov. And you can see that it's southern Alaska, it's Canada, it's northern Scotland, southern Sweden, then it goes through Russia, through Kamchatka, north of Japan. So this is very far up north. And maybe you've seen the movie Lake Placid.
Yes.
Remember that with the crocodile in the lake in Maine?
Yeah.
Right. So that was already very far-fetched. The crocodiles can't usually survive that far up north. And Maine is between the 42nd and 47th parallel. So that's between 1,110 kilometers and 1,665 kilometers south of the 57th parallel, which means between 1,000 and 1,500 kilometers south even of Pskov. And it is a very cold place. So if it's unlikely that there is a crocodile in a lake in Maine, it's even more unlikely that there is a crocodile in Pskov. But this was recorded and people took it very seriously. So there are these historical pictures, for example. This happened in 1582. And they described that these crocodiles came out of the water and they bit people. It doesn't say that they ate people, but they bit them. So this is a misidentification. I can tell you that much. but you would probably not guess what these animals actually were. So, do you want to guess, or do you want me to show you?
I mean, I could take a crack at it. It's creatures that would come out of the water and that they'd just be
Yeah.
biting people and other animals and stuff. Interesting. But not crocodiles.
No.
It's not like there's a lot of things you could. I suppose I'm just thinking more like nowadays, where it would be you wouldn't call some other animal a crocodile or an alligator because they look so different, you know. But I suppose
Yeah.
back then people just weren't as aware, were they? So it's easy to just call it something you don't know.
Right,
Since
and
I didn't see the pictures, and since I know she already knows the answer, she's kind of like a lawyer. She doesn't ask a question she doesn't already know the answer to.
Oh yeah.
But is there is a giant salamander which they have remnants left of. There's the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Taiwanese giant salamander, which are at least as long as a person. And then even here in North America, we have the one up in the north in the Appalachian Mountains they call the hellbender. But when you look at pictures of them, they look identical, but they take cold water. So that is one explanation I could come up with. It was they were giant salamanders and not crocodiles.
that is correct. It's a giant
Hey,
salamander.
this was
Hey,
better.
Good. So what I've shown you here is the Kulasuchus, and that is a prehistoric giant salamander. And as you can see, it's very, very long. But Luther is right. There are remnants of it in North Asia and mostly Northeast Asia. So I will show you pictures of living Chinese salamanders. They're called the giant Chinese salamander. And there are also some in Japan, but the Japanese ones are slightly smaller. Not very much smaller, but we'll go with the Chinese one because that is the biggest living one. And that is our boy.
Wow.
one thing that has been happening over there that I saw that, see, in Taiwan, the Taiwanese giant salamander was protected.
Yeah.
So in
Because
the pet trade, people wanted these as pets, so they couldn't have the native Taiwanese version. So they imported the Chinese and the Japanese versions into the pet trade. And then as they got too big for their tanks, they turned them loose and they started crossing with the Taiwanese version. And you
yes,
have this effect called heterosis, where if you crisscross closely related animals, the siblings are much bigger than their parents. And so now they're ending up with these giant salamanders in Taiwan that are three-way hybrids that they're trying to get rid of. But these things are just, they're not dangerous, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't be afraid of one, but they're just gigantic. I mean, they look like a big alligator crawling around on the bottom of a creek. But we have one here in Zoo in Atlanta, but they have to actually have a refrigerator to keep the water cold because they cannot take heat.
yes, that's why they're so far up north. So there is an assumption, an educated guess, that there may have been giant salamanders as far west as on the border to the European countries bordering Russia, because part of Russia is European. So they could have lived as far west as Finland, for example. That's the neighborhood of Pskov. And they may have been green, they may have been bigger than the Chinese salamanders. And as we've seen with the depictions of crocodiles, people didn't really know what a crocodile looked like back in the days. This is 1582. So, of course, they would have thought, oh, these must be crocodiles. And maybe these salamanders felt threatened. Maybe they came out of the river and they bit people, but a crocodile wouldn't just have bitten people, it would have dragged people into the water. This is
Now,
why I'm
I don't know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
opening with this story because eyewitnesses are not accurate. And even in criminology, eyewitness accounts are the least reliable evidence you can get.
Mm. Now, I don't know about the Asian version, but up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, there's a river up there that I saw a lot of the hellbenders, which is the North American version of the Chinese giant salamander. And they come in a wide variety of colors because I saw some of them laying in the real rapids of the river. Some were brown, some were olive green, and some were actually even calico. But they were all sitting there side by side, so they came multicolored. So the coloring doesn't really identify them because that's all one species, but yet they come out different colors.
Interesting.
It's kind of like, a cat having kittens, whenever she has a litter of kittens, there's no telling what's going to come out,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the actual eyewitness accounts. There is one eyewitness account. It's the oldest one, and it's from the 6th century. And I will go into that one when we're talking about what Nessie really is.
Okay.
So let's put that on the back burner for now. And the eyewitness accounts in modern times, so the second eyewitness account that we have starts in 1871, which means that we have one account from the 6th century, and then for 1300 years, nobody sees anything. And what you have to know is that in the 19th century, specifically in the Victorian period, people developed an interest in adventures. They developed an interest in torture, in deviant things, like even deviant sexuality. So they seemed very clean cut on the outside and very, very harmless, but they actually had an interest in seeing all these weird things from the past and to have an adventure in their life. And it's probably because the industrial period that was just beginning at that time, that made life much more safe, and people had the feeling that there was no adventure anymore, that their lives were too boring. So they started to go to exhibitions where medieval torture devices were exhibited, or they took an interest in all kinds of saucy stories from the past. So, for example, stories about the sex life of the Roman emperors became popular back then. So there may be a reason why this happened in 1871, because people were hell-bent on finding monsters everywhere. And the 1871 sighting was probably just a log. So there is not much on it. But somebody saw something swimming in the lake, and it swam against the current. And that is something that actually happens in Loch Ness because it has an undercurrent. So it's possible that the current on the surface goes in one direction, but the undercurrent is so strong that it grabs part of a log and that it pulls the log against the upper current. And of course, you would think that something must be swimming against the upper current, but it's actually just the undercurrent.
Interesting.
So that is one eyewitness account. And many people have said, yeah, it's probably just a log, Then we have an account from 1888, and that was a really good year for people who wanted some more excitement in their lives, because that was the year Jack the Ripper was around, but not in Scotland. So in Scotland, you needed something different to catch the interest of people. And somebody described it as a stubby-legged animal. Doesn't sound like a plesiosaur.
No.
Then in 1933, the whole thing exploded. So from 1933 on, we have lots of eyewitness accounts. And the first account from that year described it as a whale-like fish. And even kind of slug-like. And that repeated in the 1960s. So in the 1960s, some people drove around the lake, and allegedly a slug-like giant monster crossed the road in front of them. And I have pictures of that.
So it was seen on land a lot too, then.
Right. And the account from the 6th century also places it on land.
Now that's interesting.
somebody actually made a picture of the slug biology of Nessie, with scientific terms and everything.
Oh.
And here you can also see the slug-like being in front of a motorcycle. So, yes, I don't have pictures of the Ediacarans or the Tully monster because, they're very prehistoric and they kind of look like you would imagine Nessie to look like. Maybe you can retrieve some pictures of them. I will write down what they're called. But they were small animals and they were not actually something that survived into our times or even into dinosaur times. They're very, very old, but they look kind of like the slug-like animal that appears here first, the black one with the heart-shaped tail.
Right.
So there is actually a slug-like being that can spend some time on land, and it's called Glaucus atlanticus. This is a sea snail,
Very.
and this is
Yeah, that's
yes,
that's quite a sight.
yes, they are venomous. So you shouldn't touch them when you find them on the beach, and they're actually not that big. So I picked these pictures because you can't tell how big they are. I'll show you a picture of one that sits on a human hand. So that's the size.
Oh. Okay.
Otherwise, you could have said, okay, maybe it's a giant glaucus, but they're tiny.
Yeah. So there's no way it'd be one of those.
No, it's probably not this one, but that's really cool. So most people don't know that these things exist, and they're actually nicknamed the blue dragon. So
It's cool.
when you find them on the beach, don't touch them. And they're definitely not Nessie. But I found it very interesting that Nessie was described as this large slug-like animal without legs.
Yeah.
And then in 1933, you also have these rumors starting about plesiosaurs. And you can imagine why, because, people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote stories about dinosaurs, like he wrote The Lost World, and that was a well-known story at that point. So people were looking for these things. People wanted to see dinosaurs, and they were going on expeditions to find dinosaurs in the most remote corners of the world. And some of them actually found dinosaurs, but not living ones. They found bones, like in Mongolia, the bones of the Indricotherium, for example. That was in the 1920s. So people had a desire to see these things. And from 1933 on, you had these plesiosaur craze, and this is really when it started to take off. That was, well, almost 60 years after the first after the first Nessie had been sighted in 1871. And between 1871 and the actual first sighting are 1300 years. So it wasn't a plesiosaur right from the start. People described it very differently. And the older eyewitness accounts are very diverse. So yeah, it doesn't look like an animal with humps or an animal with a long neck. That only happened in 33, and then in 34 you had the surgeon's photo that I've already shown you. So after that, everyone started to see plesiosaurs, but that's not the original Nessie. That's not how it was described between the 6th century and 1933.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, good. People went really crazy over this. They used sonar on the lake, starting as early as in 1954, and there have been some sonar drives on the lake, even in 2011, for example, and I think they're still doing it. They're still trying to find something big that lives in there. But I would say it's not realistic. I'll show you St Columba now. And St Columba was from Ireland. This is him.
Right.
Looks very saintly.
Yeah.
And his name means pigeon. It's related to the name Columbus, the Latin word for pigeon. He lived between 521 and 597. So he did not only see Nessie, he also survived this. And he was very close to it. He probably touched it. He was an Irish abbot and missionary, and he moved from Ireland to Scotland. And to explain this, I have to say that he probably didn't go out of his own free will, because he was a bit of, how do I put this? A troublemaker. So he was related to the High Kings of Tara, which were the kings of Ireland back in the times. And he visited one of his relatives who was king of Ireland back then. So he had gone to a monastery, he became a monk, and then he visited the king, and he went to the king's library because monks are always interested in books. And he found an interesting book there and he copied it, which was not okay. This enraged the king, and the king forced him to give this book back. So it's a strange situation because when you know medieval books, then you know that it took a very long time to copy them. He didn't have a typewriter, he didn't have a computer. He had to do this by hand. So he must have sat there in the library for weeks or months, copied this, or it was a very short book.
And nobody thought any of the wiser.
No, nobody tried to stop him, so he was able to copy the whole book, and he tried to smuggle it out of the palace. That didn't work. He was caught and forced to give it back. So he cursed the king, which was not a good idea because even though they were relatives, this got him excommunicated. But well, he was restored, so he was taken back. And he himself decided that the ground in Ireland was a bit too hot for him, although he had been taken back into the church. So he went into exile in Alba. And Nate, do you have any idea why Scotland is called Alba?
No.
Okay. It's the ancient name of Scotland, and some say it's the true name of Scotland. So I'm showing you two maps here. The British Isles and their parts have had different names in different time periods. So Ireland wasn't always called Ireland. The Roman name, for example, is Hibernia, and the Roman name of Scotland is Caledonia. And then, of course, you have Britannia south of that. And Britannia was Wales and England. And Alba is the old Scottish name in their own language. So this is what Scots used to call Scotland before it became Scotland.
I see.
Because the name Scot has a not so good meaning. It actually means looters.
Oh.
So Scotland is the land of the looters or the robbers, and that is a nickname the Irish gave them.
Oh, I see.
So it's more respectful to speak of Scotland as Alba, for example. And you have that in Shakespeare's works, for example, when one of King Lear's daughters marries the Duke of Albany. So Albany is not Albania in Southeast Europe, but it's directly on the same island. It's on the British mainland, it's Scotland.
Oh.
Just so you know.
Hmm.
Okay.
I was thinking of the Latin word alba, which means white. So I was trying to think of something like the White Cliffs or something there, but I didn't know it was a Scottish or Roman name.
Yes, it's the same thing as with the orca. So it's a combination of Latin and Norse words, or in this case, Celtic words. Because England is also called Albion in poetry.
That's right.
And this could be an overlap between Alba, so the original name, which was probably the original name of the whole mainland at one point, and the Latin word for white, because when the Romans arrived, they came through Dover. And what do you see when you come through Dover?
White.
Yeah.
Very true.
The White Cliffs of Dover. So, yeah, that probably from a Roman point of view, England was the white land because they saw the white cliffs and that was it.
Gotcha.
Okay, he traveled to Scotland in 563, as you can see in the little picture there. It says 563.
Yeah.
And yes, he didn't want to go, but he thought he should become a missionary just to get out of Ireland. It didn't matter where he went. And he founded some monasteries in Scotland, and he started his mission there. He's also called St Columba of Iona because that is his main monastery that he founded. And 2 years after he had arrived in Scotland, he ran into Nessie. He didn't call it Nessie. They were talking about the river Ness, that is a contributory to Loch Ness. And this story was written down in the 7th century, which means probably 100 years after it happened. But it was well preserved, and back in the days, not everyone could read and write. So it was probably something that people kept telling each other over generations in that area because it was something really important. So a man tried to swim through River Ness and was attacked by a lake monster, was mauled and drowned by the monster. And there is nothing in the story that says that he was eaten, just that he was mauled and drowned. And St. Columba, ever the charming darling, sent a second man across the river.
just to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Yeah.
Yes, it's just to see what the monster would do. And the monster approached the man, but then St. Columba made the sign of the cross, and he had no idea whether this would even work. But of course it worked, and he shouted, "Go no further, do not touch the man, go back at once." And the monster backed off. And then he caught the monster, and he plowed a field with it. So what do you make of that?
He plowed a field with it?
Out of field with it.
So I'm guessing it had either like a weird mouth to do something like that, or some kind of maybe, I don't know, weird tail, I guess?
No, he used it like he would use a horse or an ox. And he plowed.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So it was able to actually pull itself along?
Yes, it was able to move across land, and I will show you some pictures here. Not of Nessie, but of pinnipeds. And
Cool.
pinnipeds are seals, for example. So you can see that they have the same flippers as a plesiosaur. And these animals probably couldn't pull a plow across land. So this sighting alone implicates that Nessie must have had legs.
Right.
That it wasn't a plesiosaur or a seal. And it also wasn't a fish or an eel. It was a 4-legged animal.
Which
when you first said the guy was
in the
mauled and drowned, I would say, well, that would fit with the whales because they say that the whales is actually able to generate a 5-pound downward force, which is enough to pull you underwater to drown you. But then when you talked about plowing the field, that's obviously not a whale's.
Nate, do you know where the word whiskey comes from?
I don't know where the word comes from.
Do you know what it means?
No.
It means water in Gaelic, and they actually don't just call it whiskey, but they call it whiskey beatha. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. If not, roast me. Roast the shit out of me. And that means water of life.
Right. Okay.
So I'll send you 2 terms here. And as soon as, as far as I know, the first one is pronounced wishi, and the second one is pronounced wishi.
Okay.
The first one means water horse, and the second one means water bull. And both were used to describe Nessie back in the
Okay.
times when St. Columba plowed a field with it. So it was clearly described as a 4-legged animal that probably resembled a horse or a bull or an ox. And let me show you a picture of St. Columba. That is not correct, because here you can see that it is depicted as a plesiosaur.
Hmm.
What could have been instead? So think of horse, think of ox, think of something that drowns and mauls people, but doesn't eat them necessarily.
Drowns and moles, doesn't eat people, but can. I suppose another question is how long can it survive on land? You know.
For quite some time.
Now, they still exist in East Asia, but did the water buffalo ever occur over into Europe?
No.
Okay.
Because I mean, when you think from a mythological standpoint, my first thought would be hippocampus, but obviously this. I mean, to our understanding, this was a real creature.
Yes, and you're not completely wrong. Just cut off the second part of the word.
Oh, so just hippo?
Yeah.
A hippo in Scotland?
Doesn't that look like a horse head?
I mean, I could see why you'd misconstrue it, absolutely, especially if you're, a monk from long time ago, where you do anything to pass the time. Am I right?
And
Well, he probably didn't make this up, because there is evidence that giant prehistoric hippos lived in England. There is, in fact, the Leeds hippo.
That's true. There is the
yeah,
Leeds hippo. I didn't
and
think they
hippos.
go that far north.
So we don't know that, and instead of sailing around and using sonar to find something that lives in the lake, probably people should start looking for prehistoric hippo bones around the lake or at the bottom of the lake.
Hmm.
I'll guide you through this. I'll explain why this is probably a hippo, not just because it has a horse head or a head that is very similar to that of a horse. You need to know what horses looked like back then, because maybe you're thinking of a riding horse, and that is not the case. We're talking about Clydesdales.
Yeah.
Really heavy horses. So a hippo also has a very heavy body, and it has a giant head. So it wouldn't be weird to compare it to a heavy draft horse, for example.
I could see that. I just didn't know that they could really survive like quite cold climates.
Well, if you got parallel evolution, you've got the African elephants and the Indian elephants, which live in the tropics, but you used to have mammoths and mastodons, which lived in a cold climate.
That's true. That's true. I guess
So
it could
that
be
could
some
have,
kind of a distant relative. Yeah.
yeah, it was
I'll
just
go
back when hippos had a cold, hardy version of themselves, which is no
right.
longer exists.
And I mean, Yorkshire itself is quite cold compared to Africa. So if you
Yeah,
have one
I
in
would say
Yorkshire,
so.
if you have one in Yorkshire, why not in Scotland? I'll show you some pictures of bulls and oxen. So I think when we're talking about the water ox, this is not about the face. This is more about the body, because it's a very heavy, very muscular body. And you could compare that to a hippo. And both animals were used for pulling plows. So here are pictures of oxen that do that. And we even have pictures from the 20th century of hippos that pull little carts.
Well, that's just
This
kind of
was
weirdly adorable.
Yeah. So they could do this. You might think that they can't move very well on dry land,
No,
but
they're
they
surprisingly fast. I mean, they can be
yes,
really intimidating creatures for sure.
exactly. You can even ride on them. So
Well, I've heard that the regular African hippo spends the day in the water to stay cool, but actually comes out on land at night to graze because it's cooler.
exactly,
Mhm.
that's right. So
So they
here we
don't.
have one. And hippos are the most dangerous big animal in Africa. Not lions, not leopards, not even African wild dogs. And African wild dogs are more dangerous than leopards and lions. The hippo is responsible for most deaths caused by a large animal. And I'm saying large animal because I think there are more deaths caused by insects that will give you malaria and other kind of stuff. But of the large animals, it's definitely the most aggressive. It will absolutely come after you. You're not safe anywhere except maybe in a tree. It will capsize boats. It will actually hunt you down on land and in the water, and it will maul you and drown you.
Yeah, they are very aggressive.
But them being vegetarians, they wouldn't eat you because they're not meat eaters. So they would just kill
Yeah.
you and leave you there.
Yeah.
Right, that
Okay.
is one point. So here are some pictures of hippos drowning antelopes. Um, and you can see they attack the antelopes while they're swimming in the water. This is an impala, I think. So the antelopes don't do anything to the hippos. The hippos are probably just being territorial, but they attack them in the water and they drown them, and then they don't eat them. Although hippos have also been witnessed eating meat, like small portions of meat of carrion, for example. And here you have someone who lost his legs because they were mauled by a hippo. And you can see here that the hippo is actually attacking a person. So you can see this in the third picture where you
Yeah.
can only see the legs sticking out. So the hippo doesn't eat you, but it can kill you and it can maul you, so you lose some limbs. That is realistic for hippos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's definitely a very plausible theory. I think the only issue is there's no concrete proof that there were hippos around that area, right?
Not in Scotland, that is right. But
Right.
we have some hippos very far north, and I'll show
Yeah.
you.
No, I completely agree. It definitely seems very very plausible.
These are hippos playing in snow. And they're perfectly okay with that. So the first picture is of a hippo calf named Fiona from the zoo of Cincinnati, for example. They go outside when there's snow, so they're not afraid of the cold. Then you
Yeah.
have the hippo of Leningrad that survived the blockade of Leningrad.
Wow.
And Leningrad is in the neighborhood of Pskov. So this is a place that gets very, very cold in winter.
Uh,
Um, and that
wow.
is a different story. It's a great story. It happened in World War II. And the city was under siege by the German army.
Mm-hmm.
People couldn't get out. People were starving inside the city.
That's right.
But they managed to keep the hippo in the zoo alive.
Yeah. So, what a heartwarming tale.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
The next Disney
Um,
film.
Probably
There's a
not.
place northwest of me and Nate called. It's in Tennessee, but it's an elephant sanctuary. They've got African and Indian elephants there. But the guy that inherited his dad's farm used to raise cattle, and the guy was uninterested in cattle, so he started taking in elephants from roadside shows and everything. And
Mhm.
there's some video footage on YouTube that's got where when they got snow up there in Tennessee, these elephants were out there raking up snow and putting it on top of their head like a hat, like they were having a blast playing in the snow. So the cold didn't phase these guys at all.
Mm.
Yeah, so it doesn't even have to be a furry hippo. Because elephants also don't have that fur, but they still like to play in snow.
Well, that could
And
be like a seal or whale. If you just got a real thick layer of blubber, that
Yeah.
acts as an insulator.
exactly.
True.
I wanted to show you the mouth here. So a hippo can, without any problems, bite a grown human in half. There are some more hippo pictures, but I will send them to you afterwards.
Okay.
So I'll show you a hippo that became very famous and that lived in London in 1850.
Yeah.
This is Obaish, and we will also have to talk about him, but that's a different story. Obaish was a male hippo imported from Egypt in 1849, I think, or maybe 1850. So he was born in 1849 on an island in the Nile. They brought him to London, and he became a huge attraction in the zoo. And he even got a partner, and they managed to have a calf. So,
Oh,
yeah. We have proof that there was a hippo that survived in London.
it's amazing.
And there, in
Cool.
London, you probably have to deal with different stuff than in Scotland. So it's probably not the cold that is most dangerous in London.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, then I'll show you the prehistoric hippos. First of all, I want to show you gorgops.
Gorgops.
Yes, gorgops. Because they were a little bit bigger than modern hippos.
God,
Yeah.
they're huge.
This is one that lived in continental Europe and in the Middle East. So probably not Nessie, but they grew to this size. And they're part of the megafauna that existed during the Ice Age, for example. So the period they existed in is called the Pleistocene, and the Pleistocene went from 129,000 to 11,700 BC. You have
Okay.
huge animals there, so all the giant mammoths and woolly rhinos and everything, all of that is Pleistocene megafauna. And there were giant hippos too.
They were giant hippos.
So let's go to Leeds. We do have a Leeds hippo. It has been reconstructed, so they don't have a complete skeleton of it. But here you can see someone messing with its lower jaw, and you can see the head. You can see how big it is. So it's probably the same size as a modern African hippo. And that was found pretty far north in England.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have the Allenton hippo. And we have the Armley hippo, and the Armley hippo is so famous that it even has its own festival nowadays. And they've reconstructed it, and they have a giant hippo puppet. Yeah, that is the Armley hippo, and that is not too far from Leeds, I think.
Oh my god, puts it on wheels and everything. That's great. Oh my god.
Yeah, so there absolutely is proof. It's not just one skeleton. It's not just one tiny bone. It's a couple of skeletons of prehistoric hippos living in England as far north as in Yorkshire. So we know that they existed on the British mainland, and that makes it possible that they also existed in Scotland, and
Absolutely.
they probably existed in multiple lochs. So you have these lakes all over Scotland. So here, for example, you have a map where you can see the most important ones. But Scotland is littered with them. So this would be a really good place. It's remote. There were probably not too many people living there because people preferred to stay further south where it was nice and warm and, not always misty and rainy. because I've heard that London has its sunny days sometimes.
It does. It does. It can get quite hot.
Yes. And well, actually, when you go into statistics, then Rome has more rainy days than London, believe it or not.
How about that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's statistics.
Because there's even that style of clothes they used to sell here in America they called London fog. I always just assumed that in England it was always foggy and rainy.
Yeah.
That's what everybody says. And I mean, it's mostly true, but not always.
Oh.
Hmm.
When I
News to
was in
me.
London, it was sunny. No rain
Yeah.
or fog at all.
It can get
But
very sunny in the summertime.
yes, I think we went there in July or August.
Mm,
So
good time.
yeah, I think that the Scottish lochs would be a great environment for giant prehistoric ice age hippos. And there probably wasn't just one. So you don't have one monster of Loch Ness. You have these pods of hippos everywhere.
Mm,
They're living in these lochs, and they're protected because nobody goes there because it's too remote. The climate is too nasty. And that could be the explanation for Nessie, because how would you plow a field with a seal or a plesiosaur or an eel?
yeah. Or a sea snail.
Well, from
Yeah.
a friend of mine that lives or lived in Scotland for a while, I don't know that they can actually dig and look because Scotland is so protective, especially of their Highland area, that that's a big tourist attraction for everybody to come over there and film movies and all that type of stuff. And if they catch you out there digging a hole or excavating, they will arrest you on the spot.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
just that moss-covered mountains that they want to keep it that way, and they don't want you digging around up there. So there could be stuff up there that they haven't found, but they're not allowed to dig.
Yeah.
Exactly. And let's go into the climate for once, because you said that you thought it might be too cold in Scotland for hippos. So one thing that has been proposed is the woolly hippo. That is a theory that came up because there were hippos pretty far north, and people have speculated that maybe they had some fur. The climate wasn't always the same. So in Roman times, for example, 2000 years ago, everything was much warmer in Europe. So the temperatures they're warning us about when they're talking about climate change now are actually temperatures that existed in Roman times.
Mhm.
And you had grapes and even citrus fruits growing in Cornwall back in the times,
I can see that.
which means even the Scottish climate was probably much warmer than it is now. And the climate cooling down, that could have caused these giant hippos in the lochs to go extinct because they couldn't take it when it happened rapidly.
Yeah.
There was a period in historical times that is called the Little Ice Age. And it's roughly between 1200 and 1600 in Europe. So things started to cool down. Before that, even the medieval times were pretty warm. But when the Little Ice Age happened, the artists of Europe started to paint these landscapes. They started to paint a lot of winter landscapes. And it became very cold. So there are stories about Elizabethan England. That would be the late 16th, early 17th century. And people said the River Thames was completely frozen to the ground.
Whoa.
And it had frozen so fast and so thoroughly that you could see people who had fallen into the river who had shock frozen. So you could still see an old woman holding an apple through the ice. and this old woman froze to death within minutes, probably. She fell into the water and it closed over her, and then it froze very quickly. So you could see her sinking to the ground with an apple in her hand that she didn't let go of.
Wow.
Ugh.
Yeah. So temperatures in England dropped to probably southern Canadian temperatures. They had extremely cold winters. And this went on for 400 years, which means if Nessie, or if the hippo in Loch Ness still existed in the 6th century, and you have around 1200, like a little bit more than 600 years later, you have a situation where the climate cools down suddenly and it's cold for 400 years. It's possible that these populations didn't make it simply because there was this little ice age. It could also be due to inbreeding. That's what happened to the last mammoths that lived on an island in the far east of Russia that is called Wrangel Island. And we think that most mammoths went extinct about 10,000 years ago, but the mammoths on Wrangel Island, they actually still existed when the pyramids were built.
Wow.
Oh, wow. I didn't
And
know that. I thought they were older.
yes, most of them are, but there was a small population on this remote Russian island, and it's in the Arctic. And they existed until about 3,650 years ago, plus minus. So at that time, the pyramids already stood.
That's crazy.
They were very sick animals because of the inbreeding. So it was a too small population on a too small island that had been cut off from the mainland. So they had no sense of smell anymore. There were flowers growing in summer on that island, and the mammoths couldn't smell them because they had lost their sense of smell due to inbreeding. They were severely disabled mammoths. They were very small. They had a lot of health problems, and they bred themselves out of existence because they kept marrying their first cousins, which is something you shouldn't do. Just saying for people who like to do that.
It's good PSA for you, for those of you out there thinking of marrying your first cousins.
I'm assuming they could play a banjo real well.
I was thinking of some different groups, but yes, in the Appalachian. Is it Appalachians or Appalachians? How would you pronounce it?
Movie Deliverance, where there was that inbred kid sitting on the porch playing the banjo, and they played that song "Dueling Banjos,"
Yeah.
but he had that kind of longboard look in his face.
Yes. So there's a chance that the climate was just much warmer when St. Columba came to Scotland. So the climate was nice enough for large pods of hippos. But then it cooled down in about 1200. So they may have gone extinct then. Or they may have gone extinct in 1816, 1817. And the reason why I say this is because the Tambora volcano broke out. This was directly after the Napoleonic Wars. And this triggered a pandemic event in the 1820s because, people were tired, they were exhausted from the war. You had soldiers moving through all of Europe, they were spreading diseases. And due to the war, farmers couldn't harvest enough food, and they couldn't preserve enough food, and everything was stolen by the armies that moved through. So people were also starving at that time, and they got very sick in the 1820s due to these events. And the Tambora volcano in Indonesia didn't make it easier, because when that thing erupted, it released an ash cloud that darkened the whole planet. So 1816 is actually known as the year without a summer in Europe.
Well,
And so many horses and donkeys died in that time that an obscure invention from some German guys that had been improved by some French guys became very important. So this is called the draisine. But you will probably know this as a bicycle. The reason why we have bicycles and why we have motorbikes today is that people were forced to come up with a solution for all these dead horses not being able to pull their little carts anymore. So they replaced the horses with a man-powered thing like the draisine. And that's why we have bikes now.
Gotcha. Okay.
How about that?
And for a while, they were also called tambourets. So using the name of the volcano, Tambora, tambourets was a word that was used in France for these things for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so that was also a period of extreme cold that came suddenly over Europe, and I'll show you a map of the temperatures and how low they actually went. So you can see that France and the areas around France went just below, well, deep below average. And southern England was also affected by this. Scotland wasn't as much affected as England, actually. But, when the temperatures are falling that badly, then that can have an effect. So it is absolutely possible that the hippos in Loch Ness and in other lochs in Scotland, they made it until the Napoleonic Wars, and then this event came around, and they went extinct because of the stupid Tambora volcano.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the
I'd
thing.
heard the summer that never happened, but I didn't really know it was from that volcano.
Yeah. So this is a more modern picture of that. But people reported that their crops just froze to death, and it was dark all the time. The sun was blotted out.
Wow.
So of course you have a pandemic in the 1820s when you have the wars previous to that, and you have the Tambora eruption previous to that. Then of course people will be weak because they went through all this not so good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is an explanation for why these hippos could have gone extinct. So we think that maybe they went extinct during the Little Ice Age, or at the last possible point, probably in 1816, 1817, if they made it until then. But the point is, between 1817 and 1871, you have a period where they have already vanished and nobody's talking about monsters in Loch Ness yet. When it picks back up, people have these very diverse opinions about what is actually in the loch. So they could have remembered this for quite a while, or somebody could have stumbled across the report about St Columba's miracle. So they started investigating because there was a big interest in the Victorian age concerning monsters and adventures. And they started making things up. So I think that Nessie did exist. It went extinct. St. Columba witnessed it. So he actually saw something like that. I don't think he plowed a field with it, but it looked like an animal with a horse head and the body of an ox. So he probably thought, oh, you could probably plow a field with that.
It
I
makes for a
think
more
that
fantastic story, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think he would have had the opinion that it would make for a better miracle if he said, I caught it and I plowed a field with it.
Exactly right. Ooh, I'm so
Um,
powerful.
Yes, and when you look at his background story, he pissed off the King of Ireland. He was excommunicated, he was kicked out. He cursed the king, and he knew what he was doing because he was a relative of the king. So this was someone who probably had a very short fuse and liked to make stuff up and liked to tell tall tales.
Quite right.
Saints aren't always these nice, mild-mannered people. I like to imagine him like Father Jack Hackett Father Ted now. He was probably more like Father Jack than like Father Ted.
Could be.
So maybe we should take that as a thumbnail, just a picture of Father Jack.
Yeah, you put on
And
the
you
white
next-
collar and cuss everybody out.
Yeah, he does that. Too. I just got the DVD box. Guess what I'm doing later?
Since you recommended it, I've been watching about 2 or 3 episodes a night of that. It's pretty funny.
It is. So we could make a thumbnail with Father Jack and with St Columba with Nate's face next to him. Just a thought. But I'm at the end of this story. So where did I put my? Oh, I put everything away. Damn. Okay, but I'm done here. I will send you some more pictures.
Okay.
That is the answer to what could have been in Loch Ness and why it's probably not there anymore, and why I think that it's not a giant slug or a plesiosaur or something like that. So the good news are Nessie is probably real. The bad news are it's extinct.
It's
Gotcha.
such an incredible theory. I would have had I had no idea going into today that we'd be talking about a hippo in Scotland. I had just no idea. But I mean, you got a lot of good points, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's not impossible. What an insightful episode. Ligeia has given us an awful lot to digest and to think about when it comes to not just the theories of Nessie, but also a theory completely out there that I wouldn't have even thought of imagining in the first place. It's just hippo. Who would have thought? What an idea! But she's got a lot of great information, a lot of great, facts. You just can't go wrong with some of this. So, what are your opinions at home? Do you think this is a good theory? Do you think there's some truth to it? Maybe you have been to Loch Ness and maybe you found some evidence of hippos that you might want to share with us. Or maybe you have an even crazier, outlandish theory with your own facts and evidence, in which case, let us know. All right? We want to hear it.
Especially when you're Scottish.
But we will end this episode here for now. Thank you so very much, Luther, for joining Ligeia and myself for this this wonderful little traipse down a crazy time.
Yes. Have a good time. Bye.
We will catch everybody next time. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.